Today we are on week number 53 in continuing our Sutta explorations. And today's Sutta is another beautiful Sutta, one that is simple but oftentimes neglected by both practitioners and intellectual types, because on the surface it looks like it's, oh yes, we've covered that, or Lord Buddha has mentioned that in other suttas that I'm aware of, familiar with. But this one is really special because it discusses the very current state of affairs for the human mind, the difficulties that we are undergoing, but without realizing how serious it is. The proclivities that we are developing based on the influences that we are under in our expectations of how life is supposed to be, and what we need to seek out of life, and what is the world around us really celebrating in the face of all these things. And the sutta's title is, well, first of all, in Pali, it's Salla Sutta, which in English could be translated as, well, I translate it as arrow, the arrow. The arrow. And over the course of time, you've heard me mention that Lord Buddha talks about two arrows that a person's heart is pierced with. And this sutta happens to be the one where we really uncover as to what that means. This sutta starts off from the very beginning with Lord Buddha really drawing a clear line between what he calls, in English we can translate it as the ignorant person, or the common, ordinary, uneducated, unlearned person, crass, basically, as far as the Dhamma is concerned. This person could be educated. They might have some very, prestigious degrees from very well-known universities around the world. But if they are oblivious or unaware of the principles of Dhamma, then they qualify to be called putujjanas in this Dhamma and discipline. And that is the term that Lord Buddha uses. Of course, he uses that term throughout the suttas in many, many, many places. But he draws a distinction between a putujjana and an Arya Savaka. Well, that is the one that you've heard me and others mention, how they're the ones that are the true noble ones. The noble ones who have been trying to look at the world that they're living through, the life that they're living through the eyes of Dhamma. Trying to pierce through the illusion that we create first, and the world at large contributes in adding more fuel and data for us to be augmented in sustaining ourselves in that delusion. And that is what we generally term as avidya. So an Arya Savaka is a person who's cut oneself from being deluded, because everything is going to go under the microscope of the Dhamma. At the very least, they can stop and saying, okay, what am I doing with this action? I'm jumping from one thing to the next. And this is actually, by the way, I'm giving away the theme of today. Jumping from one extreme to the next, specifically from a pleasurable experience. We know that it can't be sustained, right? life comes and pushes us, tears us away from that experience. And then suddenly we find ourselves in the absence of it, and guess what we call that? Painful experience. And because it's painful experience, we don't like it. What do we want to do next? Go back to the enjoyable, pleasurable experience. That seesaw makes us a putujjana. Or seeing that and abstaining from that, or at least catching ourselves when we are, in the midst, in that routine, already distinguishes us to be going towards the path of nobility. So the sutta is actually sutta number 36.6 from the Samyutta Nikāya, the connected discourses. It comes from this larger section of the Samyuttas called the Vedana, which is the connected discourses dealing with feelings. And within that, there is a subsection, or the Vaggas. It comes from the Sagatha Vagga, which is suttas where at the end we have Lord Buddha, in this case, concluding or putting the teaching in a nutshell in the form of verses. So this fits into that. It comes from that, Sagatha Vagga. And the sutta's name, as I mentioned, is Salla Sutta, the arrow. So let's begin. Bhikkhus, the putujjana, or the undisciplined, ignorant person, feels a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, and a neutral feeling. Whereas the Arya Savaka, the trained noble disciple, also feels a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, and a neutral feeling. Well, bhikkhus, what then is the difference or distinction that exists between them? What sets the trained noble disciple apart from the undisciplined, ignorant person, the putujjana? Bhante, our understanding of the Dhamma is rooted in the Blessed One, who helps us see the tangible and relevant nature of the Dhamma, as we find the true meaning through the explanations given to us by the Blessed One himself. It would therefore be wonderful if the Blessed One would clarify the meaning of the question raised for us, because once we hear it from our teacher, we bhikkhus will remember it and carefully contemplate and ponder its depth of meaning. The putujjana is the one who cannot visualize an exit from misery. And we're going to see that from the very beginning of how Lord Buddha delineates the reasons why. He will elaborate rather on the step-by-step as to how a person stays a putujjana. Remember, one is not born noble, Lord Buddha says. Countless times you had Brahmins come over, and because they were the noblest class in India, they would come in and argue with Lord Buddha as to first asking, what is the thing which makes a person noble? In their mind, it was very clear. You're either born a noble or not. And it usually had to do with 7 generations on your mother's side, 7 generations on your father's side of being born, ancestry-wise, within the Brahmin class. So Lord Buddha would constantly remind them that is not the case. It is one's actions, one's behavior that makes a person noble. And now we're actually seeing as to what makes a person remain a putujjana. Bhikkhus, listen carefully and pay close attention to what I'm going to say. Yes, Bhante, the bhikkhus replied, and the Blessed One said, Bhikkhus, when the putujjana, or the undisciplined, ignorant person, with any of his senses makes contact with a painful feeling, he sorrows, grieves, and begins sobbing. He cries in anguish, beating his chest and becoming completely agitated. Such a person feels two kinds of feelings, a bodily feeling and a mental feeling. The worldlings, or the putujjanas, exist between two types of experiences: pleasant or enjoyable, and unpleasant or painful experiences. So Lord Buddha continues, you may think of a man here who is struck by an arrow, and then immediately after he is struck again by a second arrow, so that the man would now experience a feeling that is caused by two arrows. Two arrows. In much the same manner, when the putujjana, or the undisciplined, ignorant person, through any of his senses, makes contact with a painful feeling, he sorrows, grieves, and begins sobbing. He cries in anguish, beating his chest and becoming completely agitated. Such a person feels two kinds of feelings, a bodily feeling and a mental feeling. Putujjanas are not out there, a category of people living somewhere in society. You probably might have recognized this tendency. How often does it happen where we expect something to happen and it doesn't? Well, we were kind of looking forward for that to happen, but it doesn't happen. Especially if it's a repeated manifestation of it not happening, we are then thrown into the lap of pain, suffering. So there's now the battle. Dukkha is often described as the absence of the thing that we find pleasurable. So when it is absent, then we're in pain. That is dukkha. But where? Where does this dukkha occur? It is occurring in the heart, in the mind. Because on one end, you have one arrow, which is the physical pain, the bodily feeling that Lord Buddha refers to. But that doesn't hurt as much as the mental feeling, the dread that keeps coming up. Oh, the inner narratives, the inner dialogues that we have, the monologues that we keep telling ourselves. Oh, I'm not going to get it. I'm not going to get this job. I'm not going to get this. I'm not going to get this, that, things that we enjoy. You're in torture. That is the second arrow. The mental feeling, which is of the nature of dukkha in this case. So the physical pain might not have happened, might not even happen in the future. Meanwhile, however, the brain, the mind, because of its tendency to dwell in the negative possibilities, is churning you, is constantly mangling you in the grasp of suffering, pain. And that is what we're seeing. We've been seeing this for the last 3 or 4 years now. Without something having happened, people are completely saturated in fear. Fear which manifests in the form of isolating oneself, isolating your mind, isolating yourself to the point where you stop living, truly living. And that causes pain to yourself and to the whole world around you. There's no joy. A person who's feeling bodily pain might still be able to experience joy in the mind. They do have that possibility. But a person who's experiencing mental feeling of pain, suffering, the body also will respond, meaning it will not feel relaxed. It will not feel joy. So it is a double whammy. it hits both targets. And it's a miserable state to be in. Lord Buddha continues. Further, once being touched by that same painful feeling, the person now adopts an angry and contentious attitude towards it. So now you're starting to fight with it. Because fighting with the painful feeling, whatever it may be. It might be a backache. It might be a headache. It might be a state of mind. Maybe you might have a foggy brain at that time. Or maybe your concentration is not as sharp as it normally is, and you're about to go into a meeting or an important conversation. So now what do? We acknowledge to ourselves that there is this, now it's a painful feeling because it is not what I want. That turns it into a painful feeling. And what do? I start fighting against it. I want to push it out. And so now I'm really in a quarrel. How can there be peace? How can concentration really come to me? This is one of the reasons why I keep asking you when you're meditating to constantly open, and be like that muddy water, that you scoop up in a glass and you leave it alone. And the mud will come down. It will actually gather below in a different stratum. And then you have crystal clear water above. But a putujjana doesn't even give it the time of day for this possibility to even happen, in the mind at least. Because there is this contentious behavior towards that painful feeling, Lord Buddha is saying. So when he resists it by holding a hostile attitude towards that painful feeling, it can be said that the underlying tendency to anger towards that very painful feeling exists in him. So now the person has an angry attitude towards the painful feeling. If you feel like you're in doubt of all this, I invite you to remember a time where you probably have gone to a place like a hospital or met with a sick person in a setting, or even in a senior home, old people's home, nursing home, and look at their faces. You're really going to struggle to find a joyful person in the hospital. Really tough. If you do, that's wonderful for the person at least, because the person is trying to look beyond the painful feeling. They're not fighting with it. And if they are, they're doing it the right way, meaning they're accepting it and they're allowing it to be. But how many of us are even pausing during the day and saying, okay, fine, this is not happening as I wanted it to happen. I get it. And I've tried everything I could. They still keep on adding more tasks on my schedule, let's say, more projects, things that are above and beyond what my, job designates, my position. What is this? So I have to fight this. I have to fight this. Where's the fight really starting? We're not allowing ourselves to first breathe and look at the situation. That contentious behavior, that underlying tendency, that is what we call in the Dhamma anusayas, the underlying tendency, in this case of dosa or anger towards that very painful feeling, Lord Buddha says, exists in him. This is a putujjana. This is a putujjana. So, while experiencing a painful feeling, the putujjana runs the other way by seeking its opposite. What is the painful's opposite position? Something that is not painful. It's pleasant. It's enjoyable. Oh, I wish we could get those old days back. Oh, I wish, like a person who's an adult. Ah, the good old days. Oh yes, when we were children, if somebody were to manage to build a time machine and puts you in it and takes you back to when you were a child, I really doubt you're going to continue saying that when you realize you're going to go through puberty. You're going to go through so many difficulties where you don't have a say in things. You're no longer in control of whatever you are as an adult. That's even taken away from you, or whatever difficulties that you have to undergo. So we always are looking for the greener pastures across this hill. And that is what the putujjana is doing. So because he seeks the delight in experiencing sensual pleasures, it can be said that the underlying tendency to lust towards having that very pleasurable feeling exists in him. So first, Lord Buddha is establishing that the underlying tendency, the anusaya of anger or hatred, is in him because of the fact that he's fighting this painful feeling. There's there's attitude in him. And now, because of him wanting to jump to the other side, meaning I want to experience the opposite of this painful experience, now there is the anusaya of lust, raga, the desire to now have that. And anything that stops me from experiencing that, guess what? I'm going to go back to the other extreme, which is hating my situation. I'm sure many of us could point out several people from our lives that we've encountered, witnessed, having this attitude. I used to see this in elderly home when I used to go and visit friends, and I would see this in the gaze of these human beings who are now at the latter portion of their lives, looking at me, who's maybe 50 years younger than them or 60 years younger than him, and I'm walking and they're on a wheelchair. I'm able to go outside and get in my car and drive away. This is when I was a layman. But they can't do that. They have to be told what pills to take, when to be tucked into sleep. Well, you see the painful aspect of this is the life that they're leading. So the person is in a hateful relationship with what is happening. I'm just giving you one example. Of course, I'm sure you can think of many from your own lives and experiences. So now the anusaya of lust exists in the person. Therefore, it can be stated that such a person does not understand how feelings originate and arise, how they cease and pass away, how there is the constant attempt at wanting to gratify them. Gratify what? Oh, if I could just have this, I want to get this. I want to just be jumping headfirst into this. What is that? Becoming sensually gluttonous, or wanting to jump into that thing, whatever it is. If you're wanting to eat that small portion of what you consider to be delicious chocolate cake, you're no longer satisfied with that tiny little portion. You want to devour the whole cake. What is that? That is trying to seek gratification. And we do this consistently every single day in different ways. Whether it's looking at, let's say, the feeds on your social media, or always checking the phone, always checking, or going on whatever type of, any type of exposure to something other than what is happening now pulls you away. We are seeking gratification through that. But let's see what Lord Buddha says. Thus, they do not understand the danger in this. But especially, they do not understand or know anything about the true escape from these feelings. See, the thing started from a feeling that we consider bad, painful. And then we go just, through our emotions, all based on ignorance, all based on the fact that we don't want to look at what is taking place. This is the epitome of avidya. This is what we mean by ignorance, the not seeing or understanding of what is taking place is avidya. So we're in a culture today, and we have been for a while in this world today, and it's spreading, to always try to gain more gratification. If you like a song, let's say, you listen to a song, now you want to listen to that song 10 times, 100 times. If you like a certain fruit, if you like a certain dish, if you like a certain experience, how many of us are pausing? How many of us are taking, instead of jumping headfirst, just dipping our toes in there, in that pool, instead of jumping all the way to get as much as we could, to taste as much as we could? I remember years ago, I had a teacher who had a term, who had a phrase. He would say, suck the juice out of every moment. I thought this was such a beautiful thing. And I actually, over the course of time, I've said that to many people around me, to kind of, carpe diem, you just like, yeah, seize the day. Yes, take in as much. But how much wisdom is there? Until when? Until my legs don't work? I mean, Lord Buddha had tried this as Siddhartha. He had 500 wives plus his wife, the Queen Maya. All an attempt to gratify. But Lord Buddha says there is the danger in that. The danger is not seeing how this thing is playing out. What is causing all this to happen? And what is it? Is none other than the seeking of enjoyable experiences as we run away, as if our hair is on fire, away to the opposite direction. From what? From pain. Anything that does not fit my agenda of the day, I dislike. And that's why you have so many, let's say, people breaking up, so many people. Years ago, I've seen the numbers that there were over 62 or 65% divorce rate in Western countries. Why? That's over 50%. Why? Well, she's not the person that I married. He's not the person I married. Yeah, because there's this thing called anicca, People are transforming constantly. How much capacity is there for me to allow you to be you and still be loved by me? And vice versa. We only want the cookie. And if there's no cookies in the jar, hey, we'd rather destroy the jar because it's empty. It's not serving us. I'm going to go over there and look for another jar that is full of cookies. That is the putujjana. That is not Dhamma. That kind of a lifestyle. And what is the danger? It is the believing that by pushing forward in our quest to be gratified somehow, that we will in fact be getting that sense of satisfaction. That itself is the danger. And remember, in English, we don't have an absolutely perfect definition for dukkha. We have approximations, if you will. Yes, we see dukkha as suffering, but another one is dissatisfaction or unsatisfactoriness. Always having that bitter taste left in the mouth, even after you've eaten that cake. Why is that? That painful feeling, that vacuous feeling inside that leaves us not feeling full, something's missing. That's another definition I would propose for dukkha. Something's not right. Something's missing from this whole experience. What do? I go again in that same wrong direction, trying to gratify myself and gain those extra 200-300 pounds. Why? Because I didn't learn from that first tiny little slice of cake. I still went after this. Again, this is not just about diet issues, but this is about mental diet and how we approach life, because today's food that we're eating, even the companies that run the food industry, there used to be Kraft and other, huge names, and now they're gobbled up by the same companies that run or are responsible for cigarette companies, Philip Morris and all these things. They bought all the huge food producing giants, and now all that food that we eat is also producing in us certain chemical reactions that normal food would never do. Everything you touch almost has sugar added in it, among other things. Well, what does sugar do? Creates addiction. So we have to be responsible in what we're putting in our heads, and definitely what we're putting into our mouth and our gut. So Dhamma doesn't mean just intellectual stuff. No, you're taking responsibility and ownership of your life, including your body. Because what we're putting in our bodies is also affecting how I'm thinking. Because the person now is, because of what we're exposed to, whether they like it or not, they're being pushed into these two extremes. Meaning running away from the painful to the pleasurable. And that is what we are believing to be the norm. And that is not. That's what Lord Buddha is saying. That is not. Because we're missing the whole middle ground, the big, big, big portion. Life is not maximization of pleasurable experiences and minimization of painful ones. That is not life. But that's what we're being told it is. And if we believe it, we are putujjanas. Who doesn't believe it? The Arya Savaka. Someone who says, no, 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 no. What about this middle? Majority of life is taking place within the middle, where it is neither pleasurable nor painful. Well, we have a label for that life gives us. Something that we unanimously love to call bland, boring, uninteresting. We can't live like that. But that is where Nibbana happens, as we're going to see, being mentioned. Emancipation takes place not in those two extremes, running away from the pain to the pleasurable. It is in the middle. Now, because he does not truly understand these things, it can be said that the underlying tendency to ignorance in regard to neutral feelings exists in him. Neutral feelings is another, I don't like to use the term that often scholars use, neither pleasurable nor painful. It's too wordy, too much of a mouthful. Just neutral, people can relate to much better, I think. So this person then, because of their unwillingness to understand, meaning to come out of ignorance, their unwillingness to do that, because of that, there is the anusaya of moha in them, of ignorance, avidya. And if such a person feels a pleasant feeling, he becomes identified with it. Now Lord Buddha is putting his explanation in he's concluding that portion as to what distinguishes a putujjana. So in a nutshell, he's saying, if such a person feels a pleasant feeling, he becomes identified with it and gets stuck to that feeling. whatever feeling it is. That's what we mean also by identification. Anatta is what? It's the opposite of this. It says, me and this feeling are not the same. Because 5 seconds ago, when this feeling didn't happen, what was I? Now all of a sudden we're joined together, and it's like joined at the umbilical. Now we're like buddies. Like, this is me. This is who I am. Asmimana. There's no such thing. Because based on anicca, it will not stay. And when he feels a painful feeling, he becomes identified with it too, and gets stuck to that feeling. Oh, this only happens to me. Oh, it always happens to me. Oh, why does it? See? The whole universe is conspiring against me. And while having a neutral feeling, he again becomes identified with it and gets stuck to that feeling as well. How? By wanting to jump out of that neutral feeling because it's too boring. That's why many of us will rush out of a meditation hall the moment the gong or the bell rings. Or we try to look at the phone, a clock, something. Why? Because it's too boring. People today want to go into retreats to have jhanas. Why? Because otherwise it's boring. They want to have insights. Why? Because otherwise it is, you guessed it, boring. Well, they're missing a whole opportunity here. In the Majjhima Sutta, Lord Buddha talks about this beautifully. The middle, you have on one extreme, you have the painful extreme. One end of it, you have the painful experience. On the other hand, you have the pleasurable experience. And in the big portion, which is the middle, you have neutral, neither pleasurable, neither nor painful. That's where life happens. That's where life happens. Not in the extremes. But if you remember from Majjhima Sutta, the seamstress comes in and stitches them together, the two extremes, and makes us believe, and the seamstress is craving, makes us believe that no, life is all about when bad things happen, run to the other, opposite. Seek the joy. Seek the pleasurable. Basically, this is the main crux, the main strategy of all propaganda. You will never have a politician who comes in and says, you know what, if you pick me, vote for me, your life will be more miserable. I will do harmful things to you. No candidate will do that. They will always promise you the opposite. Always, yes, the grass is greener on the other side. Eat me, the display item says. Buy me, and you'll have love in your life. Car advertisements today talk about love. So one basically is relinquishing oneself into that feeling by what we mean by stuck, getting identified with it. Why? Because you are willingly, intentionally wanting to become oblivious, ignorant of what is taking place. You're telling yourself a different story than what is taking place in front of you. And for 60, 70, 80 years or 100 years we're telling ourselves the same old story, which is a lie. We don't want to see the foolish stories we tell ourselves of the effort of trying to gratify ourselves. My mother used to say, even a donkey does not fall into the same ditch or hole twice. It falls maybe once. Next time around, it will see this hole, the ditch, it will go around it. We, on the other hand, human beings, whether I have amanasikara or asati is the issue, versus having sati or manasikara towards the experience. instead of blindfolding myself and rush out of this experience that is taking place in this moment. That is the way I understand anyhow the meaning of the term that we've used and overused in the past 3-4 decades. Be here now. Be here now. Many people have mistranslated that as suck the juice out of the moment. Ignore what's happening around you. Well, you deserve this. All of these stem from ignorance, a lack of responsibility towards what is happening in the mind. Am I suffocating the noise in my mind, in my heart, by what I'm about to do, or imagining, trying myself, doing my best to get myself gratified by this experience? This bhikkhu is called a putujjana, or an undisciplined, ignorant person who is stuck to repeated births, aging, and death. Someone who is stuck to repeatedly experience sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and anguish. Someone who is stuck to re-experiencing suffering, I declare. On the other hand, bhikkhus, when the trained noble disciple, through any of his senses, makes contact with a painful feeling, he does not sorrow, does not grieve, nor begins sobbing. He does not cry in anguish, nor beats his chest or becomes agitated. Such a person feels only one kind of feeling, a bodily feeling, with no mental feeling joining it. So when you stub your toe, when that biting ant comes and bites you while you're trying to rest, is it now more than that bite that the ant left you with? Are you still dwelling on that? The pain, how could I be so stupid to stub my toe? That would be the second error. In this case, the Arya Savaka only has one. The physical pain, yes, it's blue. The toe has turned blue. Okay, fine, I get it. You may think of a man here who is struck by an arrow, but he is not struck again by a second arrow, so that the man would now only experience a feeling that is caused by a single arrow. In much the same manner, when the trained noble disciple, through any of his senses, makes contact with a painful feeling, he does not sorrow, does not grieve, nor begins sobbing. He does not cry in anguish, nor beats his chest or becomes agitated. Such a person feels only one kind of feeling, a bodily feeling, with no mental feeling joining it. This is a perfect example of patinisagga, giving up. Yes, the pain came. Yes, I didn't ask for it. Did I do everything in my power? Was I even aware? But something happened. The thing dropped on my foot, and now my foot is bruised. Okay. End of story. Now I have to repair the damage, of course. But I don't have to give myself an extra source of pain. That's what Lord Buddha is saying. I've constantly mentioned how this path is all about wisdom. You gaining the wisdom to live life better. Now, not in some heavenly realm. Now, improving the quality of your life, bringing more peace and joy and sanity into your life. And being responsible for all that joy that comes. It is only a person, however, who is willing to put the time, the serious practice, to contemplate the nature of feeling according to the Satipatthana, meaning bringing the 4 foundations of mindfulness with you in everything that you do. Yes, I had no control over somebody coming in and hitting me. Like I was walking the other day on a path and it had rained, so there was a puddle full of muddy water. And who knows what else, because there's livestock, there's cattle that walk around, so all the rain was pouring rain earlier. So it had stopped raining. So I'm walking, on this side, and someone decides to just go over the puddle. And there it goes. So we have a now, splashing going on, a Niagara of muddy water plus all the interesting sediments and maybe cow dung, all that flying my way into my robes. Now, was I trying my best to avoid being splashed at? Yeah. But did it happen? Yes. Now, did I pick up, look for something like a rock or something, or a coconut or something to toss at the, scooter driver? No. It was a wonderful opportunity to observe if there was any feeling generated, if there were any leftover thoughts. Oh, I can't believe what people have become. Or how could they do that? I would never do that. Observing that, if it occurs, observing that is practicing satipatthana. Instead of saying, oh, I need to get into new robes, I was trying to run out of the painful experience, or unpleasant rather, in this case. But looking at that neutral area where all the juiciness of life really is taking place, actually, what seems like boring or neutral, instead of me wanting to jump to whatever is the opposite. Further, once being touched by that same painful feeling, the person now does not adopt an angry or contentious attitude towards it. When he no longer resists it by holding a hostile attitude towards that painful feeling, it can be said that the possibility for an underlying tendency to anger towards that very painful feeling no longer exists in him. So the anusaya for, or the hidden tendency, underlying tendency of anger doesn't exist in that person, Lord Buddha is saying, because there is no fighting with that stubbing of the toe by calling yourself names, adding more, pouring more oil on the fire, as my mom used to say. Like, you don't have to do that. There's already a fire there. Let's extinguish it, okay? Let's not add more fuel to it. So while experiencing a painful feeling, the trained noble disciple does not run the other way by seeking its opposite. That is, he does not go looking for ways to have pleasurable sense experiences. If you don't have this, okay, so I'm going to go into, let's say, when I used to live in California, people would get frustrated, with stress and all these difficulties and whatever they have to put up with and things, unhappy jobs, careers. And Friday rolls around the corner, guess what they do? Happy hour, or drive 4 hours to go to Vegas and just spend all that cash. I feel good and empty in the pockets and who knows what else. Seeking to gratify oneself. This is stupidity. That's why Lord Buddha calls it putujjana. And what is the reason for this? So for such a person to do this, Lord Buddha asks, it is because the trained noble disciple does understand that there is a way of escaping from feeling pain. He's giving the escape. Other than running after its opposite. That itself is huge. To know that I don't have to run after the opposite of what is happening to me is huge. Other than running after its opposite, such as the experiencing of sensual pleasure. Now, because he does not seek the delight in experiencing sensual pleasure, it can be said that the possibility for an underlying tendency to lust towards having that very pleasurable feeling does not exist in him. The person driving to Vegas or to the bar to get drunk with alcohol, which is a depressant, by the way, just like, oxymoron. The person is excited, parking the car, getting out, going into I'm gonna get drunk. But they're escaping. They're running away from the rain only to get caught up in a hailstorm. Therefore, it can be stated that such a person does understand how feelings originate and arise, how they cease and pass away, how there is the constant attempt at wanting to gratify them. Thus, they do understand the danger in this, and especially, they do understand and know directly the true escape from these feelings. We don't have to be victims of the seesaw. That's what the Majjhima Sutta several months ago I covered with you was talking about. Earlier I mentioned about the seamstress, which is craving. That's the one who comes. That's why Lord Buddha calls craving the seamstress, because it comes and stitches the two experiences together. Oh, just forget about this. Now, because he does truly understand these things, it can be said that the underlying tendency to ignorance in regard to neutral feelings does not exist in him. So he does not, this person does not have the anusaya, the underlying tendency to ignorance. Why? Because this person is seeing this whole thing play out. Why or how? Well, they just have to go and check the record. How did I relate to a situation similar to when I stubbed my toe last year? I did that. I did those things, and then all of a sudden those bad things happened. And I felt miserable afterwards. Okay, am I doing those things now? No. Why? Because I decided that that didn't turn out right. And I felt horrible afterwards. Okay, we're not doing that. See? Already the person is leaving behind the putujjanahood, no longer being a putujjana. They're walking away from that debacle. And if such a person feels a pleasant feeling, he does not become identified with it. He does not get stuck to that feeling. And when he feels a painful feeling, he does not become identified with it. He does not get stuck to that feeling either. And while having a neutral feeling, he does not become identified with it. He does not get stuck to that feeling as well. You're experiencing it. You're not denying yourself these feelings, by the way. You're not an ostrich sticking your head in the ground, saying, this is not happening, I'm going to ignore it. No, you're observing these things, but you're not buying into the whole story of, oh, this is it, this is it. Oh, again, anicca. Remember? It's always changing. These things are happening. So long as we have nama rupa, mentality and materiality, these four elements, this body, which needs to be sustained by all these nutrients and things, and the sunlight and the oxygen, all these things, and you live on this planet which has gravity, and you need to interact with people, you're going to go through some experiences. This bhikkhu is called a trained noble disciple who is liberated from repeated births, aging, and death. Someone who is freed from experiencing sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and anguish. Someone who is released from re-experiencing suffering, I declare. This, bhikkhus, is the difference and distinction that exists between the putujjana, the undisciplined, ignorant person, and the trained noble disciple. This is what sets apart the trained noble disciple from the undisciplined, ignorant person, the putujjana. And here Lord Buddha gives this whole conclusion in a verse form. When feeling a sensation, be it pleasurable or painful, the very wise and learned person does not get stuck, nor becomes identified with it. This itself is the great difference between the wise one and the putujjana. For the very learned and wise person who has pondered and comprehended the Dhamma intuitively sees the distinctions between this world and the next. As a result, experiences that are desired do not come to dominate nor agitate his heart. Same is true with those experiences that are unwanted. for they too could neither dominate nor agitate his heart. Due to the absence of anger in him towards those painful feelings, yearning and loathing are no more to be found in his heart, as both of these have been seen for what they are and brought to an end. Now, by seeing for himself the stainless, sorrowless state, the one thus understanding it correctly and fully crosses over and passes beyond all forms of rebirth. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. When we dispel, we get rid of ignorance, knowledge arises, information, understanding. Understanding is more subtle than knowledge, because knowledge also has to be dispelled. We have to let go. We can't think about all these processes taking place. We can just be aware of them, and then understanding will unfold. Same thing with satipatthana. You cannot be watching every single step you take and be hyper vigilant with your thoughts and feelings. Your heart, your mind will become agitated. That's why we need practice to turn it into a knack. Meditation is a knack. I was mentioning yesterday to someone. It's an ability that comes through practice. That practice itself will even allow us to drop all these terminologies and ways of thinking, and we're looking at the feeling, intuitively understanding the Dhamma in each moment. Because Nirodha will never happen on its own unless there is intelligently, wisely applied effort. Nirodha is the no more being in prison. Rodha is one way of saying prison. Ni Rodha means no more in prison, meaning freedom, meaning cessation, ending of the suffering. Because that's when Nibbana will emerge. So there's this sense of maturity that the person is going through. And there's also in the suttas this lovely image. I just wanted to touch on the neutral, or neither pleasurable nor painful experience, which I mentioned is the majority of our lives. That somehow society tells us, hey, run away from that, go to the exciting part. Excitement, seek excitement. That's why we are like, getting a message, a text message, SMS or Facebook, something is like crack. It's like dopamine hit. And they know what they're doing. You have psychologists working with the designers of all these apps to agitate the mind. That's why in the beginning I was saying it's so much harder now for an average human being to see this, because there's so much working against us. So you really, really have to practice to identify the neutral part instead of being a victim and just jumping from one extreme to the next. The image I was referring to from the suttas is the deer simile, the deer, the animal, where Lord Buddha says how the deer will walk on the soil, the wet ground and the mud, and it will leave its footprints, right? But at one portion of its journey, it will jump on a rocky plateau. What? Rocky plateau. Hard surface. And soon enough, you won't even find any footprints of the deer, so long as it's walking on the plateau. That is the meditator working with the neutral, no longer being pulled into, sucked into this narrative of jump out of the painful and go and seek out, gratify yourself with the pleasurable story. They don't buy it anymore. When the pleasurable happens, yes, of course, you celebrate it. But no more than it's necessary. You're experiencing it, you're observing it. Because emancipation will happen only through understanding. Nirodha will not fall into your lap. Nibbana will not fall into your lap without you doing anything. We need to process. We need to understand. We need to understand our role in the perpetuation of suffering, or the ability that we're giving ourselves to pause a moment and to see if there is any contribution that we are putting in to sustain our ignorance by repeating old cycles, old actions, or choosing to have a different response, then jumping from one extreme to the next. So, specific conditions will create specific feelings. Now, those specific conditions might be from the outside, like I was saying earlier, you know, like walking on the road and there's a puddle. I mean, if I were not walking on that road next to the puddle, or maybe if I was like 10 meters ahead or behind, the motorbike going over the puddle might have still splashed, but nobody would be there to receive it. But it so happened that I was there, so all the elements were perfect for the splashing action to take place. Specific conditions create specific feelings. Now, of course, it was not an enjoyable feeling. It was a feeling, though. Can I allow it to just be that? And we can ask these questions of ourselves. And I will pause here to see if there's any questions and comments. It's an interesting sutta, as you saw. We went over a little bit because, yes, Upatissa, please.
Thanks very much, Bhante, for the interesting talk. I'm reminded of yet another sutta, a very similar sutta. I think it's Majjhima Nikāya 44. I think it's called Chula Vedala Sutta, whereby the Arahant Dhammadina Theri had a conversation with Visakha, I think, who is her ex-husband. That's where the three types of feelings are being discussed, being asked to, where Visakha asked Dhammadina Theri to clarify. And if I remember correctly, it went something like, what's the counterpart of Sukha Vedana? And the answer is Dukkha Vedana, which is unpleasant feelings. And what's the counterpart of unpleasant feelings, which is Sukha Vedana? Pleasant feelings is the counterpart of unpleasant feelings. And the conversation went on to say what is the counterpart to Adukkha Masukha Vedana, the neutral feelings, which is part of our discussion today, isn't it? And the counterpart, the answer is that the counterpart of neutral feelings is avijja, because it's a neutral feeling. It's a feeling of boredom, a craving for more eventful things to happen, basically arises from ignorance. And the counterpart to ignorance is vijja, which is knowledge. And the counterpart to knowledge is nibbana.
What's the next question that he asks?
What's the counterpart of nibbana?
And her answer is?
I guess all of us, unless we are arahants, we would be tempted by our restlessness to ask the counterpart of nibbana, isn't it?
Well, that's what, she put him in his spot because she happened to be, before becoming a Teri, a nun. For those of you who don't know, she was Visakha's, the questioner's wife, who became an Anagami one night after listening to Lord Buddha's Dhamma talk. He comes home and he cannot be a husband anymore to her. So at first she thought that she's done something wrong, and he's like, no, 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 but I can only relate to you as my sister. And she says, that's fine. And after pondering a little bit, she says, but okay, so you can be my brother, but would you give me permission to go and become a nun, a bhikkhuni? And he says, by all means. Well, guess what? Soon enough, she not only becomes an anagami, but she becomes an arahant. So after some months, she returns back to, I forgot, maybe it was Savatthi or Vesali, but he goes to meet the Teri, his ex-wife, the nun now, and he asks her all these very deep questions until the very last question, where he says, what's the counterpart, as Upatissa was saying, to Nibbana? And she says, now you've reached your limit, buddy. She's an arahant. Only an arahant knows the answer to that. So that's your limit. And then she tells him to go and ask Lord Buddha all these, to relate all this conversation that took place and see if my answers were satisfactory. And Lord Buddha says, had you asked me, Visakha, these questions, I would have answered you exactly the same way that this noble Teri did. I couldn't have answered any better. He goes, wow. So that confirms to him that she's an arahant, in case he had any doubts. But thank you, Upatissa, for that. The one beautiful thing that many within that Chula Vedala Sutta that you mentioned that really have touched me was the one where she talks about patigha, the repulsion or revulsion, some people describe it. When the noble disciple is on the path to attain, and despite all their effort, they are not attaining Nibbana. What happens in their heart is this sense of, because there's this longing, there's this sense of pain. But this is not the same type of pain that you would have in the anusaya of dosa, which is anger or hatred. This is a unique situation that happens only in the noble disciple, where they're longing for Nibbana to happen constantly because they know that's the goal, that's it. It's like a bird having wings, but it wants to fly, it can't because something's holding them back. But they don't have any hatred towards the whole state of affairs. It's just a matter of time until that also takes place. So that is a beautiful aspect of how she describes the anusaya to be different. In this case, the feeling of hatred, not anusaya, to be different, the patigha. So you just reminded me of that. So wonderful. Any other thoughts before I'm going to go ahead and connect the two, edit the videos to see if they can, hopefully I didn't lose that. Or else we'll have to do another sutta discussion on that portion. So if there aren't any comments, questions, we'll just share some merit. May suffering ones be suffering free and the fear struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power share in these merits of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you be well. May the smile on your faces never fade away. And may there be tranquility and peace, non-agitation in your heart, no matter what situations you might find yourself in. And hopefully today's discussion, Sutta Exploration, helps you not to feel a minority in your own life, in the bad sense, meaning you have to struggle. You have to struggle to beat the odds. You have to struggle to go to the other extreme to really be happy. No, there's the bigger chunk of life that's happening. Be like that deer that jumps on the rocky plateau, never leaving any footprints. There's so much juice to be had in the neutral zone. I'll leave you with that until next time. Sukhi Hot.